What is going on, guys? Cody McBroom, host of the Tailored Life podcast. Today, we have a very special guest, a really phenomenal guest, Nick Shaw, the CEO of Renaissance Periodization. If you don't know who Renaissance Periodization is, you might be living under a rock. They're one of the biggest fitness education coaching companies in the industry, and they've changed the game in the industry, and they have leading professionals across their whole staff. It's actually really, really impressive, and I've had almost every single one of them on the podcast at one point in time, but I was excited to have Nick on because he just released a book called Fit for Success, and instead of going the fitness route or the nutrition route like Renaissance Periodization normally does, they created a hierarchy of success and what it takes to be successful, and I think Fit for Success does the book really well as a title, but it also serves their company really well because it is a fitness company. So today we're going to talk about this success hierarchy and what it took Nick Shaw to create such a massive company and organization. And we're going to talk about this hierarchy of success so you can immediately take things away and apply it to your own success journey. Guys, if you like this channel, do me a huge favor. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the little red alert button so you get notified when we drop new podcast episodes. And if you don't have time to sit here and watch an hour-plus long interview, go check out our clips channel because we take all the meat and potatoes and the good things out of the episodes, and we clip them up and we put them on that channel for you to take and absorb very quickly and efficiently throughout your day. All right, guys, that's all I got for you. Let's get into the interview with the one and only Nick Shaw. All right, man, so the first question I have for you is, who is Nick Shaw? You know, Renaissance Periodization is a large company, very respectable company. Somebody that, as a business owner and just somebody who's been coaching for 10 plus years, you guys have been somebody that's been in my repertoire of studying and sought out information for years now. I've been to some of your seminars, so it's really cool to have you as the final guest of the entire team basically on the podcast. I've interviewed basically everybody. But let's start with just kind of your background, man. Who is Nick Shaw?
Yeah, totally. So first, thanks for having me on, man. Really appreciate it. Maybe save the best for last, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Totally just kidding with that. Uh, I've always been into sports and fitness really since I was in middle school. Played sports, so always loved sports, all that good stuff. So really, that's where my background and sort of love of fitness comes from. I just realized from a pretty early age that I just loved working out. I loved training, and that the harder that I worked, the better results I got, the better that I would do compared to other people. And once you get a little taste of that, if you're a slightly competitive person, it's usually pretty straightforward. You just want to keep doing more of that. So I was always very interested in that and always just loved training. I was called a gym rat in high school, and I thought that was the greatest compliment I could ever receive. No joke. I remember it was the high school girls track coach called me that, and I was like, I don't know if he meant it in a good or bad sense, but I was like, wow, thank you, I appreciate that. Um, like I was never a very talented person, when it comes to sports or running or training or any of that. But the thing that I realized is that I had the ability. I don't know if maybe you could say hard work is a talent, I suppose, but that was really the only thing that I had in my repertoire. So I was like, okay, well, I'll roll with that then. So that's the hand that I'm dealt. I'll take that and run with it. And again, that's what drew me to. I was actually a runner in high school, but then I always loved lifting too. And so when I got to college, that whole mindset, I just kept lifting, and it started kind of getting away from running as I got into college. Really into lifting. Met Mike, of course, Dr. Mike Israetel in college. And he was like, hey, you should join our powerlifting club. And I said, well, okay, I'm a competitive person. I'm like, well, I like lifting. Kind of makes sense. And once I did that, I did a first meet. I'd only been training seriously. I don't think I had really ever deadlifted before. Yeah, I could squat, bench, whatever. But he had me do it. I went down to a meet with him in Kentucky, and I was like, yes, this is it. This is what I'm going to do. I love this. I love the idea of getting better, always pushing myself. And yeah, that was, I want to say 2007 is when I met Mike.
So what made you, and I believe, are you the co-founder? Did you partner with Mike or somebody else to start Renaissance Periodization, or how did that even come about? What made you start it in the first place?
Yeah, so it was Mike and I. So again, I met him in college. He convinced me to start lifting with him. So we started training together. And then he actually graduated. He was 2 years ahead of me in school. So he went down to Appalachian State to get his master's degree. And I was still at Michigan. And he actually coached me through my first bodybuilding show in 2008. And again, I just knew that's what I wanted to do. it sucked, right? You're miserable and you're suffering to do all that, to go on stage. Right? I loved it.
Yeah.
Absolutely loved it. It just was right up my alley. And, so he coached me. We learned a lot. Um, Once I graduated from college, he actually got a personal training job in New York City. He just kind of wanted something to do, wanted to live in New York. I think his sister was living there at the time. And he's like, hey, you should come out and interview. It would be cool. Like, you're graduating. What are you going to do? I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do. Something fitness. I don't know. So went out there and we were personal trainers for like a year. He got a little bored of it. He was pretty overly qualified, with a master's degree at the time to be personal training folks. So he went back to get his PhD. I stayed. Long story short, it eventually led to him training people online, me training people in person. We were sort of crisscrossing back and forth, always referring one another. And we just said, hey, why don't we just start something? And I had already had a company set up because I was training people on my own in New York City, which was actually awesome. It's in Manhattan, Midtown Manhattan, training some of the, literally the most successful people in the entire world. It's really cool. And so that's how it really got started. Like, no joke. This was, let's call it 2011, maybe 2012, something like that, like way back in the day before, online coaching was just barely a thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you said you've been coaching for 10 years. I mean, same here. So 10, 12 years, something like that. But it's totally different now versus then. Before, like, maybe you had Facebook. I don't even know if Instagram was around. Like, now, everyone and their brother is a coach, of course. So, it's both good and bad. But that's really how it got started. It's just something that we love doing. And again, it formed from that core passion that we had, where we just love fitness. We love lifting. We love getting better. That's it.
I love that, man. I often tell people, I get questions all the time, like how should I get into online training, or how do I become a better online coach? And my first answer is always, you should train people in person for as long as you can first, because I think just being with real people in person is such a valuable skill set. I mean, from communication to connection with clients, empathy, being able to hold a conversation and not just count reps, right? But then also seeing how they do exercises, so you can actually prescribe them cues and ways to get through it, versus just a list of things on a piece of paper that sounds good because you read a study that showed blah, 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 right? So I love the practicality behind where you guys started from. Why RP? Why Renaissance Periodization? What made you guys call it that? I've always been curious of what I love, like, as a business owner, I love hearing why people brand the way they do, but what made that come about?
Real quick, I'm just going to comment on something you said before. So, someone else had asked me before, well, like, why did you want to train people in person? And very much is what you said. You have to have that. How do you start online? Because you have no proof of what you can do. At least if you train people in person, you have some credibility. You're able to gain some testimonials or whatever. Like, you have to start there. I don't think most people can just start online. You have to have something to kind of build your foundation. And from that, you can build upon. So it was great. I mean, it kind of got to the point where eventually I was only training people in person and doing zero online. And then I started to do a little bit of online, and I quickly realized it was just much more efficient. It's better use of my time, not having to travel over to New York City. So that balance started to shift from in person to online. So it was, 50-50. And then all of a sudden it kept shifting more and more like this. And then when we finally moved down, we moved out of New York City. My wife and I, we had two small kids. So New York City and two small kids is pretty much impossible unless you run a hedge fund or something. So, and once we moved down here, I was like, I'm never training people again. Just do everything online. And that's that. RP, man, it's just really funny. Again, it just kind of shows, hindsight's 2020, of course, but would we have chosen the same name now if we kind of would have known that, hey, if we fast forward 8 years, we would be decently well known? I don't know if we would have chosen the same name. So Renaissance, pretty self-explanatory, kind of the rebirth. So we wanted it to be, we had just seen so much stuff in person, the way people train people in person, and from, bodybuilding, watching other people do it. There was no real rhyme or reason, right? It's just kind of like, oh, hey, so-and-so did something, so I'm going to do it. Now that's fine because they're working hard, which is kind of the main thing that you have to get. So we wanted this rebirth of the science and evidence-based approach into fitness. So that's Renaissance. So that's actually, well, no, that's one part of it. Renaissance Technology is actually a hedge fund in Long Island. And instead of hiring, Wall Street folks and day traders and all that, they hire PhDs, mathematicians, rocket scientists, those types. And they consistently outperform the market every single year. maybe barring like 1 year or something. But again, it's just like they have a formula, they have an equation of as to how things work, and they just stick with that, right? They don't give in to fads and gimmicks or whatever might pop up. So again, that's what's kind of the 1A and 1B reason behind it. Again, like we wanted that. We wanted that sort of equation. Now, you can only do that so much in the fitness world, like you said, because you have to have that sort of art of coaching and a science, and you have to kind of mold those two together if you really want the best results. So that's kind of how Renaissance was. The name was chosen. Periodization, hopefully self-explanatory for people listening. You use one phase to set up the next phase. There you go.
I actually think it's extremely fitting, like listening to that and like knowing what you guys do now, especially because a lot of what you guys put out, it's a lot of education. And when I look at what you guys do, it's even more so education than coaching, right? I know you guys still coach, but like you guys are at the forefront of educating coaches on how to coach. You know what I mean? And I think that like I'm surprised you guys haven't. I mean, who knows? You might in the future, but come out with like a certification, because what you guys are doing is just as high quality, especially if people are a part of RB Plus, which I'm a part of, and you guys have been given it for free ever since COVID, which has been amazing. But I've been a paying member for a long time, and you guys put so much content and education in that place. To me, it's like you guys are like the educational hub, and I guess was that your plan at the beginning, or did you guys start more on the front of like we just want to coach people in, like you said, rebirth, like do this the right way because you see all these trainers doing it incorrectly, which I 100% agree with. Or from the start, where you like eventually we want to become like this educational resource?
A little bit of both. So we just started out, we wanted to coach people, and that was really, that was it. Like we just knew we wanted to coach people, we wanted to help people. Um, I mean, we started with more hardcore folks like bodybuilders, powerlifters, people that were already really serious. And we just love that because that's what we did ourselves. So, we could have only done that, only coach bodybuilders or whatever, and we'd be totally fine. We'd be totally happy. But we kind of realized that it's sort of funny because most people think if you give stuff away for free, like you're kind of hurting yourself. Well, like we saw other people, doing that and giving information away for free. And we're like, well, why don't we just do that? Like we know we have the information. Why don't we start doing that? So yeah, we had RP Plus. It was like $9.99 a month or something like that. But yeah, like now we just make it free, especially with COVID. We're just like, hey, people are at home more. Boom, here you go. But even that, like our YouTube channel, it's completely free. I mean, how many hours of footage on there can you watch? And there's like college level courses and all that stuff on there. It's like if you just give that stuff away for free, well, one, you're helping people, but two, like enough people are going to come to that it's going to be a net benefit, of course. And then three, those people are just going to be really big fans. And what happens, like they're going to probably help support you because you're doing so much for free. So it's not like this. It's just a net win for everyone, really.
You got to play the patience game, because I think
Oh
that,
yeah.
because I think doing that is great. And we do the same thing. We put content out everywhere, but it builds trust with people. So when they do need to purchase something that's going to help them, they're probably going to come to the people they trust, which is you if you're putting out this much content.
Yeah, I think Mark Bell was kind of like almost a pioneer in the fitness world. Like that's just always what he did. He was just always giving away stuff for free, and I think it's been to his benefit, of course. I mean, he's a very well known individual, and so if you kind of follow that model, it's probably a pretty good one because, like you said, you got to build that trust. If we talk a little bit about the book later on, but yeah, one of the key things is you definitely have to play the long game. It's Man, I could literally talk for hours about people not wanting to play the long game, and it's to their detriment.
Well, let's start there. I mean, my next question was, why did you write this book? So if you want to kind of tell us why, and then you can dive right into, essentially, I know you have like the success pyramid, which I will say it's part of me laughed because I'm like, there's a pyramid for everything, but it makes it so easy to understand. Like, the recovery book you guys have, I had James on for, and we went through the whole thing, and it was like that pyramid makes it so much easier for people to understand what's important with recovery. For nutrition, same thing. Hypertrophy, same thing. So it's so perfect that you did this for success as well. But take us through the evolution of that. Like, why did you decide to write this? And kind of we'll start going through the sections if we can.
Yeah, so 2020, here we are. The end of 2020 is quickly approaching. It's been a rough year for everyone. Real quick backstory: January, my wife was diagnosed with breast cancer. And, that was obviously a slap to the face. She's relatively young. She's healthy. She eats better than I do, if we're being completely honest. Like the epitome of health, just someone that you would never picture anything like that ever happening to. And so it's just kind of this big eye opener. She has surgery. She has complications from the surgery. She's in the hospital for like a week. Then she starts chemo in March. I went with her to the first treatment. What happens after that? COVID hits, quarantine, shelter in place. Like here we are, just kind of like one gut punch after another, just, comedy of errors, so to speak. And it would have been far too easy to just really get down on our luck and just be like, oh, woe is us. Like, oh, poor us. Everyone should feel sorry for us. And I just don't operate that way. I'm never going to be that way. I don't ever want to be seen as like a victim. So, if we go even further back, I'd always been just fascinating with reading, learning, figuring out why people are successful, like what are the things that these people do. And so I kind of had this framework in my mind. But it's one thing to talk about these things, and we can hop on podcasts all day long and talk about it. But it's a little bit different when you're truly forced to live these aspects every single day of your life. Like there's no other option. We were stuck at home for months, because of my wife's health. Like we couldn't go out. Like we were taking the stay-at-home stuff very seriously for a long time. And so for me, it was just like, all right, well, I'm not going to wallow in self-pity. I'm not going to be a victim. What can I do that's going to make some good come of this? And how can I help people? And so it's funny, just one morning I was reading and it just kind of hit me. I'm like, well, I have these kind of like 10 main things. What if I just made them into a pyramid? And so I sat down and I sketched something out. Of course, I show it to Mike. We get on a call for a good hour debating all this stuff back and forth. And so he helped me rework it a little bit. And I was just like, I think we're onto something here. And the cool part about RP is we've always been great at helping people when it comes to fitness, health, nutrition, right? Recovery, like you said. But we don't really have anything that takes one step outside of the fitness circles. So overcoming adversity, overcoming obstacles, maybe more like mindset. I don't want to call this book like sports psychology, but it has some pretty relevant stuff to whether you are in fitness, you're in business, or if you just need to overcome adversity, right? Like the same principles that make someone successful in any of those three things, they're all the same, they're all universal. And so that was really this eye-opener to me, because like I've been lucky enough to work with a lot of really top athletes, and you start hearing them talk, and you start working with them, and you notice the same themes coming up. Like, why are they successful? Well, it's because they do these handful of things. So that's really the backstory for the book. And again, I just love the idea of, if you look at successful people, what do they do, right? And then if you look at unsuccessful people, what do they do? Well, is it kind of the inverse? And if it is the inverse, you're probably onto something. Because if you only look at successful people, well, you might get that bias, right? Like, okay, well, is that really why, or are there some other things? And then you look on the flip side of that, and you start to notice the inverse applies. And so that was really the light bulb for me. I was like, yeah, I think onto something here.
When you said watching what successful people do, that's something that has just been not consuming of me, but I've always like sought out interviews of business owners and professional athletes and CEOs and what's going on behind the scenes and what do they do every day? When do they wake up? What do they do in the morning? What do they do at night? Do they have a routine? Do they not have a routine? Like, what do they journal? Like, I've always been fascinated by that. And I think it's cool because, like you said, success leaves clues. A lot of times you look at all these people and you read from these authors and you're like, oh, this is why I started meditating. I'm not like a huge meditator, but I did get into that because I was like, I don't want to meditate, but every person I'm looking into seems to think it has a benefit. So let me give this a try because there's obviously something good about calming down and kind of shutting your sympathetic nervous system down every once in a while. So I love that, man. Can you take us through the actual pyramid, like just like titles, and then we can kind of break it down?
Yeah, totally. It's funny that you say that about meditation and mindfulness because I was the exact same way. I mean, I kind of roll my eyes thinking, that's too,
Yeah.
I don't know, wishy-washy, hippity dippity, whatever. And so I was really skeptical. But then you start just looking into it more and you start realizing that there's just a lot of other benefits that come from that, mainly just being more self-aware, not being as reactionary, being more rational, more logical, so you don't react emotionally, because what happens when you react emotionally? Usually good things are not going to happen. Usually it's bad stuff. Now that's always the case, of course, but that's really the key to it. And you start to just get that sense of, hey, something happens. I don't have to react emotionally or right away, impulsively. You kind of just get that little split second. If you can buy yourself that little split second, it doesn't even have to be a long time. You just are able to prevent yourself from overreacting to things or just reacting irrationally, right? And if you can do that, you're going to be better off. So like, that's the thing. I'm right there with you. Am I good at it? No, I suck at it. I still find myself, I'm like, why am I doing this? It's like, this is like the hardest thing in the world. But, there's lots of days where I'll just kind of sit there and I'm just like, I feel like that was completely useless. That's also part of it, right? So successful people, even if they have those days, they just keep going and they just keep doing it, right? So a lot of people, more unsuccessful people, might have one of those days and then they'll just quit. Well, are you ever going to get better if you quit? No, of course not. So I'm glad you brought that up because I feel the same way. I think many people, if they've never done it before, they're thinking exactly what we're thinking, but they might just never do it because they're, afraid.
Yeah, 100%, man. I couldn't agree more.
So so real quick, I can talk a lot about this stuff all day long, but so the pyramid. So there's sort of 7 key pillars of it, 7 habits of success. So the most foundational one is work ethic, right? And it's the most self-explanatory one. Like, it's honestly the shortest chapter in the book, even though it's the most foundational one. Why is that? I mean, everyone knows you have to work hard, right? And so the reason that it's important is because it literally creates success. So again, if we take fitness, which is a perfect analogy that we can use, you can have the best diet in the world. You can have the best training plan in the world. Well, what happens if it just sits there on your computer or your phone and you never do anything with it? Nothing happens. Literally nothing happens. It's like you might as well not even have it. So you got to have action, right? You can have the best ideas in the world when it comes to business. But if you don't take action on them, you don't do anything with them, nothing happens. You're just spinning your wheels. So that's why that one's at the bottom of the pyramid. You have to have that before anything else. Above that, you have internal locus of control. Here's a fascinating thing that I found with this. A lot of people, they're like, did you misspell locus? And I'm like, no, I did not misspell it. Like, I'm not that dumb, right? Like, I wouldn't misspell that. Everyone knows the idea and the concept, but they've just never heard that terminology before. But essentially all it is, in a nutshell, is, do you believe things happen to you? Or do you believe that the actions you take matter and that the actions and the steps that you take matter and will influence your outcomes? And if you think the latter of the two, that's more of an internal locus of control. If you think more of the opposite, you think things happen to you, well, there's nothing you can do about it, right? It kind of goes back to that victim mentality where, well, why would you do anything if you don't think what you do matters, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So number 3 is positive mindset. So again, it's not necessarily just mindset, but it's how do you think? Are you more hopeful? Or are you more optimistic? Are you more pessimistic about the way you think and all that? Because if you think more positive, well, chances are, and again, a lot of these things tie into one another, of course. They all kind of interrelate. If you think more positively, you're going to be more hopeful that the actions you do take will matter. And again, it all just kind of falls back into, if you believe all those things, well, you're going to take more action to do more work to eventually create better results. So that's number 3. Number 4, discipline. I love talking about that one. I think a big key to that, we can kind of touch on these a little bit as you want, but long term, you got to think long term. Delayed gratification. It's kind of the big one up there. Number 5 after that is sort of your purpose and meaning, right? And so again, we kicked off the episode, you said, hey, what's your background? My background's always been fitness. And even if we want to take one sort of look underneath that, well, again, what's fitness all about? It's this continual pursuit of getting better, right? That's at the foundation of honestly everything that I do. So why did I get into bodybuilding? Well, you can always get better, right? It's the same with business, the same with everything. You can always be getting better. If you're a real big fan of self-improvement, you love that. You're just going to keep doing it. So that's kind of my overall purpose, meaning, and my why behind things. And then number 6, you have failure, which is really a unique one because you think, well, successful people, why would failure be up there? And it's really just how you respond to failure. Because a lot of people think that, well, if you fail, then you just kind of quit and give up. Well, that's the thing that unsuccessful people do. Successful people, they get failure, experience failure, they just keep going. They figure out a way to maneuver around it, or they learn from it so it doesn't happen again. And then at the top of the pyramid, you have recharge. So again, fits in perfectly to training, and especially on this podcast, people are used to hearing more evidence-based stuff. You can't just go, 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 right? There has to be a little bit of a balance. So I said, let's recharge. You can't just grind, hardcore, brother. You gotta be able to ease up a little bit.
I love it, man. There's so many things in there that I can resonate with and align with so well. Like I actually recorded a podcast recently, and I stole this from a friend of mine, Jordan Syatt, but he talked about like I called it the success loop. He didn't have a title for it, but it's like you take action, you get a result, and that result creates motivation to take action again. And most people try to seek out motivation and rely on that motivation to push them to take action and then get a result. But it all starts with action, right? Your action is what matters most. And I love that you mentioned that. And I also love the failure. I think that's something that people probably were surprised you threw in there. But I was actually just talking to one of the guys that works for me. He does all of our media and everything. He was talking to me about he was my roommate. I don't know how many years ago, and I was a trainer in person at this place, really well-known gym in Seattle, and I was getting ready to give up all my clients, get rid of everything to start this online business because I had this vision and everything. And he was like, man, I just remember people just telling you no and telling you like it was such a bad idea and it didn't make sense. Like you have security over and over again, and it was almost like you just didn't even like listen. You just like ignored and kept moving forward. And he was like, I don't have that talent. Like I don't know how you do that. And I told him, I was like, man, I don't care about failure. It's like, that doesn't change the ending outcome, you know?
Yeah, I mean, man, there's a lot to unpack there for sure. So a lot of people do get all that negative talk, right? So if we go back to diet and training, if you start eating better, well, were the people around you, are they supportive of you? Or are they, oh, hey, why don't you have a beer tonight? Or why don't you have some pizza? And like, of course you can have those things in moderation, but like, are they supportive of the things you're trying to go after? And so a lot of people, well, they don't want to do these things because they're hard. So they're going to make little comments like that or something. They're going to kind of, you know, try to bring you down a little bit, so to speak. And yeah, it's the same thing, right? So why take risk when it comes to business? Like you're going to get a lot of people out there that tell you no, like, hey, that's silly and all that stuff. Now, I don't know about you, but did you just like totally go cold? Like you got rid of all your clients in person and just went exclusively online, or was there a little like segue there where you kept some or?
There was a segue that I started training people online before I left, but to me, it was like a respect thing. I wanted to leave on good terms. I had a really good relationship with the people who owned that gym, and they were well known in the industry. So to me, I was like, hey, I will take the next couple months to transition all my clients to the other coaches at the gym,
Mhm.
and I'm gonna kind of do my thing. And it was actually when I found out I was having a kid. Once I found out my wife was pregnant, I was like, all right, now's the chance. Like I had, if not now, then never, you know. So I just jumped at it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, that's really interesting. So I think there's a book by Adam Grant. I forget which one it is, but he kind of talks about that. And one of the things that he talks about is a lot of people think that you always have to take that leap from 0 to 100. And in my case, I guess, because I really thought about that when I read it, because it seemed like a lot of people don't necessarily do that, but it seems that way. So I had that transition period where I was still doing some in person, and it kind of that balance kept shifting back and forth. It wasn't like I just one day, dropped all my clients. I was like, oh, I'm done, because that would have been a really big risk. But the interesting thing is, my wife had a really good job in New York City, very good, worked at a big time law firm, all that stuff. She was on the business side. And so she had that. So I almost kind of look back like, did that sort of allow me to take more risks? Because not everyone has that, right? And then, but what's funny, because we moved to Charlotte. So we moved from New York City to Charlotte, halfway across the country. And then she ended up quitting her job that we moved down here for, right? And then we were all in. We were 100% all eggs in the RP basket in 2015. And so what are the pros and cons? Well, the cons are if we fail, then we fail big. So we basically had the mindset, we're like, we cannot fail. We will not fail. We worked round the clock, literally around the clock. Again, like we go back to that, answering every single client email, message on social media. Since 2015, this is almost 6 years ago now, like every single day. And when I say every single day, I'm not joking, I'm not exaggerating, right? Because if we took a day off, what would happen? We would get behind, right? Because there were so many messages coming in each day, like we couldn't do it. Now, again, like we were able to eventually step back just a tiny little bit to get some help in. So we weren't, getting the burnout. So again, like it's just funny when you look at it like that because a lot of people think that you have to take these huge risks, and sometimes you do for sure. But I just kind of look back at it from our approach, where I think maybe that helped RP originally get his feet off the ground.
I think there is something to say about kind of having your back against the wall. Because if I look at my situation too, it was like I found out I was having a daughter,
Yeah,
so we immediately put a down payment on our first home because we were living in an apartment because we were like we can't stay in this apartment with a baby.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
I quit my job and then I asked my wife to not go back to work after maternity leave because I was like, I'm this has to work. I don't want to put our kids in daycare. I want you to be home. So to me, it was like that's a lot of pressure, and it was crazy how fast the business grew once I had that pressure on my
hmm
back. Because kind of going back to your principle of meaning and purpose and why, like your reason why, like it really fueled that why for me. But at the same time, I also love that you didn't put why at the bottom because a lot of people, like the books start with why. Like people talk about you got to find your purpose and your why, and I agree with that. But I believe that if you don't start taking action and just start doing work, you might not even realize what your purpose or meaning is.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of debate, and I think some really good arguments to be made for if you flip around some of the things on the pyramid. And I would probably shake my head and say, yeah, yeah, totally. I think
Right.
you're absolutely right. We could change some things around. So there's definitely a little bit of debate back and forth on the exact order. Like they're all important, right? Like you kind of need to have that action before you can do stuff, and it kind of all makes logically sense that way. So, but there is a good argument for sure, and I couldn't argue too much with people. They said otherwise.
How important do you think that I mean you just kind of spoke on it, like basically pushing yourself until burnout or close to it. How important do you think that is for business owners to kind of go through that grinding phase? Because I can tell you, I had the first 2 years for us was the same way. It was just like I felt like every day I was doing something. I didn't care. I loved it at the time. It was stressful, but it was to me necessary to build what I wanted to build. Do you feel like people kind of got to go through that just grimy dirt grinding phase to become successful?
How successful?
Hmm. I guess that's a different definition for everybody, right?
Yeah, totally. So if you want to be top of the top, you got to go through that. I don't care who you are, you got to go through that. If you want to just, be reasonably successful, and again, that definition, here's the thing about success, it differs for every single person out there. Success could be overcoming cancer, it could be overcoming, whatever. You get fired from a job, you go through a divorce, something like that, like overcoming adversity. It could be business, it could be sports, it could be fitness. So there's just different levels of success and what it means to people. And it's totally okay. I think if people want to kind of have that work-life balance, so to speak, um, you can have that, and you'll be okay. I think you'll be well off, I suppose. But I think if you really want to get to the top, you have to go through that period, and there's going to be a lot of suck along the way. And again, I think people that just really have that why, it's just what they want to do. Um, I don't know about you, but people kind of ask me like, "Oh, like, are you kind of happy with like where you are and whatever?" And I'm super incredibly grateful for everything that I have. I'd never want that to come across as I'm not grateful, because I am. Like, I grew up from lower middle class, like rural Michigan, middle of nowhere, all that. So like I'm incredibly grateful for where I am, but at the same time, I feel like I'm like even nowhere close to where I can be or where I should be. So it's just like this balancing act of those two things. Like, does that make sense? You ever kind of have that?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a double-edged sword. Like you're never
Mm-hmm.
satisfied, which fuels you to grow,
Yeah.
but it's also like, fuck, I'm never satisfied. That's not always the most positive thing.
Yeah, but and again, like, well, we can kind of interpret things two ways, right? Like
Hmm.
we have the power to interpret and sort of choose. So a lot of people will see that as a negative, and they'll say, "Oh, like you're just never happy. You're never going to be happy." Okay, that's one way to look at it, I suppose. But on the flip side of that, I love that mindset because I know I always want to get better. And I don't care really what it's at, right? It could be business, it could be fitness, it could be sports, whatever you name it. But like, there's always something to aim for. There's always more to do, and I like that. I like that journey because that's just what it is. It's the journey. It's not like there's this destination and end. It's just no, like this is just what I love. It's like part of who I am. It's what I do.
Yeah, I think it was. I can't remember the book, Simon Sinek's new book. He talks a lot about being process oriented versus outcome oriented. And I kind of think you have to have that process oriented mindset of like, it's not necessarily the ending destination that I'm going to get to that's going to satisfy me or make me happy or give me quote unquote success. It's this process and this growth journey leading towards, I always say, chasing the unicorn. Like it really never stops. You know, it's you're never going to find the unicorn. It's not real, but you're going to keep chasing it and pursuing it. Um, I don't remember who I heard that from, but as soon as they said, I was like, that's exactly what finding success is like.
That's what it is. Yeah. And well, if you're into fitness, if you really love fitness, you probably already have that mindset a lot built in. Like think back to bodybuilding. I competed in bodybuilding. Is there ever an end in sight to bodybuilding? No. Like, bodybuilders are never happy. Like there's always a little bit more muscle they can put on somewhere, a little bit leaner they can get, be better conditioned, things like that. Power lifter, like, are you kidding me? Powerlifters are never satisfied. They always want to lift a little bit more. You squat 1,000 pounds, awesome. How can I squat 1,005 pounds? Right? That's just the mindset that a lot of people have that truly want to reach, and like they just kind of know what it takes. And yeah, they do love that process. And again, if you love that process enough, usually over time, if you stay patient, stay on that journey, you're going to get success. Now, might you become the best in the world? I don't know. There's probably a lot more involved to it than just hard work to get there. But again, like it's just embracing that mindset of always wanting to get better, having a more of a growth mindset, and that's just what it takes.
Yeah. I one question I had for you when you were talking about like we were talking about the grinding phase is work life balance. You kind of talked about that. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Because I think I've said before that work like it's bullshit. Balance is bullshit because if you want to build an empire, if you want to build something big, it is going to take the majority of your time. It doesn't mean you shouldn't be present at home or still spend time with your family. It just means that if we look at hour by hour of my day, I work more hours than I hang out with my daughter, but that's the sacrifice I make to build what I'm building. And it doesn't
Mhm.
mean I'm not present when I'm home with my daughter, and so I'm wondering if you're along the same lines, if you think that you can have that balance more, if you delegate properly, or like, what are your thoughts on that?
It's a really good question. I definitely didn't have that balance for like a couple of years, like you said, and it really shifts things because you do kind of get close to that teetering on the edge of burnout, and
Hmm.
it really makes you prioritize and reevaluate things. But at the same time, like now that we have a lot better team at RP and there's a lot of folks doing stuff, I actually do have a better work-life balance. Now, some of it was because of having to homeschool and the craziness that is 2020. And our kids are home all the time. We both work from home, my wife and I, and I luckily have a home gym here, so we really weren't leaving our house or doing anything. So again, like, was that too much of a shift back in the other way in terms of that balance? Like, that's hard to say, but if you are home enough, long enough, you just kind of get that. You just want to get out and do stuff. So you can find ways to be a bit more balanced. And I think there's always a dichotomy. You always have to weigh that. But like, yeah, if you want to truly get to the top, you're not really ever in 50-50 balance. Now, balance might be 80-20. You're not just working all the time. Like, and family is important. All these other things are important. So you are making time for that. But I don't think there's ever a true 50-50 split. And some people won't like that answer, and that's fine. But that's what it takes to get to the top.
And I would,
Not, but all the way up.
yeah, and I think too, like you doing it that way allows you to spend more time now, so it's kind of like the pain of that gives you the pleasure of this. Because I even know for me, like this whole year, like 2020 has been like my focus has been delegation. What can I give? Like we've built the team more, and then what can I give them to do? How many more responsibilities can they have? And that's given me more time with my family, and it's given them growth, but I think
Mhm.
if I didn't spend those 2 years of not having that balance, still being present but not home nearly as much as I am now,
Yeah,
we wouldn't be able to do that.
for sure. Like I mean, you have to build that, right? Because you couldn't just start with lots of delegation because it probably didn't make sense.
Hmm.
Like financially, I mean, you're probably struggling when you first get started, so you're not able to have a bunch of help. So you got to grind. Like there's going to be that period at some point where you just got to put in that work. Like pretty much no matter who you are, like you have to go through that at some point.
Um, uh, we're getting closer to the time, so I want to make sure I go back to this because before we even started talking about the book, this is the first thing you said, and it was about kind of like a longevity mindset.
Mhm.
Talk to me about that. Talk to me about why that's so important. Because I think that's one of the biggest issues with the fitness and nutrition industry today. Not only from people wanting to go through fad diets and get a quick fix, but also from, like we talked about earlier, trainers that are like, hey man, like I just finished my NASM CPT. I have an Instagram account. I want to coach people online now. And it's like, man, there's so much more you have to do before you have the right to be telling people what to do in the gym and with their diet across the country. So talk to us about that longevity and that requirement.
Yeah, so I think it's all about delayed gratification. So everyone wants instant results. Everyone wants instant gratification. Like that's not new. We're all human. We all want that. Of course, I want to become a billionaire by tomorrow, and everyone does, right? That's just not how it works. It's just you're setting yourself up for too much failure if you think that, because even for people that have, let's say, a moderate time horizon approach, like they're going to get frustrated along the way and they might end up quitting. But like the people that are really successful, they stick to the basics and they do these sort of seemingly simple, mundane things, but they keep doing them and they keep doing them. And even when it sucks, and even when they're frustrated and tired, and again, I have to remind myself of this all the time. It's actually good to have Dr. Mike around sometimes because he reminds me of it. And sometimes I remind him of it. But it's just part of this longer term approach. And you have to have that if you want to be successful, because you might be willing to take trade-offs and make some impulsive decisions if you care too much about what happens, overnight. Well, you think 10 years from now, you're going to make probably better choices than you do right here in the present moment, because we all want results and we all want them overnight, right? It's literally why we basically have jobs in the fitness industry, because people try all these fads and gimmicks. They don't work. They get frustrated, and then what happens? Well, eventually they come over and like, oh, hey, I saw something online. Like, I gotta check this RP thing out. And they're like, hey, we don't have any magic, we don't have any secrets, but we have a really simple and easy follow plan. And if you do it, you will get results. But you got to bring your work ethic and you got to be consistent, because consistency is key. Consistency is literally everything. And when you think like that, you just keep going. You keep doing these little things over time, right? What starts to slowly happen starts compounding. And again, you almost don't even notice it, but it keeps building on itself. And then all of a sudden, a year from now, you keep doing all these things. A couple of years from now, you're a fundamentally different person. Again, like it's not rocket science. So why doesn't everyone do this? Well, it's because we're human and we make all sorts of stupid mistakes all the time because we're too impulsive, right? Like, why aren't more people in shape, or why do we have an obesity epidemic? Well, because we have all this tasty, delicious stuff in front of us and it tastes good and we want to do it now, right? Like, think about 2020 and how many people are probably worse off because of the pandemic and all that stuff. Well, they're probably just making bad choices. And I get it because we're stressful times and all that. But again, the successful people are just going to take the better steps, better actions. They're going to form the better habits over time from doing these things, and just kind of becomes part of who they are.
I think it sounds brutal, but the timeline game, it kind of weeds out the weak.
Yeah.
I think you have to be willing, and I talk to people about this all the time, even with fitness. Like when they're first getting started with us, I'm like, we have this like contract that if you work with our coaches, you have to commit to 3 months. But I want you to know that your results are going to take much longer than that. And there are times where people can go through a 3 month cut for sure. But there's a lot of gem pop people that we work with that I'm like, I need you to commit to a year. Like I need you mentally, not to me. I don't need you to sign anything. I need you to commit to yourself that you're going to do this for a year, because it's not going to be quick. It's not going to be something that just happens. And if it does, you're not going to sustain it unless you spend enough time learning what the fuck to do to sustain that. And that takes work, takes time.
Totally, 100%. And on the flip side, if you just look at people that are less successful, well, it's because they're not willing to play the long game, and they make bad choices, bad decisions, that they're too impulsive. They only care about what's in front of them right here, right now, and they're just not thinking longer term, right? And the best example is really like personal finances. Well, how do you become better off? Well, you have to play the long game. You have to, right? There's tons of allures out there, and there's probably lots of predators that want to prey on people that think instant gratification. But again, like there's nothing sexy about this approach, right? And that's the problem, because there's all these more sexier approaches that offer all these things, but they don't work. And eventually people get burnt and probably come around to it. Hopefully, if they are going to be successful, they will come around to that eventually. But yeah, it's really tough. It's a really tough mindset, because we look around, we're comparing ourselves to others. We have social media. We're like, well, hey, so-and-so has something that I don't have. Like, I want that now. Like, what do I need to do? And then you go try to replicate that and it doesn't work. But if you just said, hey, well, I don't care what they have. I don't care what they're doing. I'm just going to commit to myself, keep getting better, focus on that internal locus of control. And all of a sudden, 6 months, a year from now, like, you're probably past that other person, right? Like, it's just how it works. It's just really funny. It's just nothing sexy and stuff. So people don't want to do it. It's
Yeah.
boring.
Yeah, it is. I think that's a good point too. I think a lot of times, in my experience at least, when I do set that longer term goal, that bigger goal that I'm like, all right, this is going to take a while. Usually I get there faster than I thought I would. And you actually pick progress up quicker because you have that long mindset, right? Um, Regarding the success pyramid in the book and everything, is there any one thing that you feel like we left out or didn't harp on enough that people really need to hear or reason they need to read this?
I think the two most important parts are the delayed gratification and the internal locus of control. I just think if you have those things, again, you don't really focus on what other people are doing. You don't really care. And I'm not saying this is easy. I still struggle with it myself. I'll look around on social media. I'm like, come on. I'll see that stuff and I'm like, yeah, I need to do that. Like, we're all guilty of it, right? It's whether or not we act on that or think, okay, let's like take that logical step back and, can we control what other people are doing? Probably not. So let's focus on what we can do and just keep doing that. Again, you have to play that long game. If you do that, you're going to be more successful. It's not sexy. It's hard and it's boring. Can you market hard and boring? Right? It's hard. Right? That's why you see all this stuff out there that's fads and gimmicks and all that because that's what most people want. Like it's literally wired into our human brains. So it's tough, man. It's a tough thing out there, but if you want to be successful, you got to sort of commit to that longer term approach and just playing that slow, steady, boring game.
Yeah, I think that's the least sexy but most important advice that you could possibly give the listeners. Honestly, I think that's great.
I know, right? And I wish I had something where I could come on and be like, this is the thing, you need to do this. Like if you do this one thing, 'cause that's what people want. People want that. They want it, like they're literally out there looking for it. But that one thing doesn't really exist. And if there is one secret, it's like you said. So you try to take that fast approach and you burn out and you probably start off worse than you were and you keep repeating that. Whereas like that person that just takes the slow, steady approach, they do end up getting there faster. And that's really the secret. Like if people want that secret, that's the secret. But again, it's just hard when we're human, so people aren't going to want to do it. Or they might want to do it for a little bit, but they'll just get bored or distracted and they'll quit. And the people that just stay committed, they stay on that track. Well, a couple of years from now, you look back and you're like, well, like, what did you do? Like, what's your secret? And you're like, okay, well, remember what I told you 5 years ago on that podcast? Well, I literally just did that every single day. And the other people, who knows what they're doing. And yeah, there's no magic. There's no secret out there, unfortunately.
Yeah, there's no hacks, and I think people are constantly looking for little hacks. But now that you've finished writing the book, um, is there like what are your thoughts now? Are like for the next step? Like, are you like, man, now I want to dive more into this topic. I want to talk about this more. I want to put together a program. I want to do another book. Do you have any other plans?
Uh, there's a
Selfish
little,
question, just personally
yeah.
curious.
Yeah, so there's a little part in the book that says like, where do you think RP will be in 5 years? And it goes back to that whole process, being process oriented. I don't know exactly where we'll be. I just know we're going to keep aiming to get a little bit better each and every single year. The same applies with our app, the RP Diet Coach app. We're going to keep releasing little updates every few months or so, and we're going to keep getting better, and we'll keep getting more and more data from users, and we'll just keep getting better. And like where that approach is going to take us exactly, I'm not 100% sure, but I know a year from now we'll be better. A year after that will be even better than a year from now. And it's just like that's what keeps going. So in terms of me personally, I love talking about this stuff. I could talk about it all day long. Yeah, maybe it's funny too because at some point you have to draw a line. Like I could have kept tweaking this book long enough and like delaying the release date because there's always more stuff you read and learn. You want to add it in, but at some point you just have to draw that line and be like, okay, like this is good enough for now. Let's get it out. I'm confident in it. So yeah, it would be cool to do another book. Maybe have some plans, but nothing has started yet. But there's always something up here cooking.
Yeah, yeah, I love the idea of not really knowing where you're going except up. Like I think that's a really big takeaway for people to listen to. Um, I used to ask this personality question to interviews like all the time, long time ago, and just based on this conversation, it makes me want to ask you this question. But it was kind of like this personality question. It's a scenario, and this is the last thing I'll ask you today. But you're on a flight to Japan, so you have a long flight ahead of you, and you have two empty seats next to you that you could put anybody in, dead or alive, but they cannot be friends or family. Who would be sitting next to you for that 13-hour flight or whatever it is?
I'll take one sports person, so I'll take so I'm going to say Kobe Bryant because he's no longer around. Otherwise, I would say Michael Jordan. It's kind of 1A, 1B. I think they have a fascinating mindset. The other person, I'd probably take someone that's more, business oriented. So let's say Jeff Bezos.
Mm,
That's
that would,
right up your alley,
yeah,
Seattle area.
yep. That would be an interesting conversation to have with that guy. If you lived over here, it's crazy watching the evolution of Amazon because everywhere you go now, there's an Amazon headquarters. Like literally every town or city lining up to Seattle from Tacoma. It's nuts. So, but that's cool, man. That would be a good flight for sure.
Be a good flight. I was going to say I'd probably just take a bunch of books with me too. I thought that was actually going to be the question. Like, you have a 12-hour flight. Like, what are you doing? I'm like, I don't know. Probably reading.
Yeah, that's usually I get a book and try to, if it's a long flight, I'm like I got one book to finish on this flight there and back.
Totally.
So, but man, I appreciate your time today. This is a great podcast. With this, it's a topic that we haven't really dove into heavily on the show. So I think it's going to be really applicable to a lot of people. And it's been great having you on, man. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. And I love talking about this stuff. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, and before I let you go, of course, like where can they get the book? Where are Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, whatever social handles that you want to plug? That way I can put them all in the description.
Yeah, sure. So just go to Amazon.com and just type in Fit for Success, Nick Shaw. It'll pop up and you can get it on Kindle or you can get the hardcover. And I'm sort of just working on, again, it's just funny, you do something for the first time. Like I'm trying to kind of figure all that stuff out and make sure it's on Amazon Prime. And by the time this does drop, it should be available on Amazon Prime as well. But yeah, just get it on Amazon. At RP Strength is probably where most people know about us from. It's our main Instagram. And then myself personally is at nick.shaw.rp.
Perfect, man. I'll link all that in the show notes. Once again, thank you for coming on.
Thank you.